Okay guys, so in this video I'm going to walk you through the basics of Agile development, at least the way that I myself am accustomed to working and the way that I've pretty much worked with it so far in my career in a range of different companies. So let's get into it. Now, first and foremost, what you have in front of you is a very simple representation of a Kanban board. And although agile development technically is about more than this, there are a few practices within agile development. Some call it Scrum, some call it Kanban, and we can absolutely have a discussion about the semantics of each of them. And what I'm going for here is not to try and show you the exact definition of how one works over the other. I'm simply going to show you let's call it the crash course in the basic way that you most likely are going to work when you work as part of a software developer team. Now, each team and each company usually have their own flavors, and the thing is that it's very rare that anybody is a purist when it comes to these agile work processes. So I will simply show you the flavor that most of the time that I've seen and I've myself work, the way that I am accustomed to working, and the way I see most of my teammates and other coworkers work as well. So the thing that we're looking at here is, as I said, the Kanban board, and basically what it tries to represent is that it's simply a board that represents the different steps in which a so-called story is at one given moment. Now, a story is just a piece of work, and a story is usually divided up into two categories. You can have an epic, technically it's just a card on the board, and as you can see here we have actually one epic, and the idea behind an epic is basically that this is a big piece of work or a big feature that we want to deliver, and what you usually do is that you try to figure out, okay, what are natural, good segments or subtasks and of this epic, and we call these stories, and all of it is basically another word for saying, hey, this is a piece of work that needs to be done, and that's basically it. And you simply have a card to represent that piece of work. So then we have these different steps. I mean, each Kanban, this what you're seeing right now, this board here, is just my own one, which is it's a flavor of the most common way that I've seen, that I myself have experienced working in this manner. So basically what's going to happen is that we're going to have a backlog section where, basically the backlog is the thing where you have pretty much it's a big bucket basically, where every single story that exists within the company is going to be found. Now, Trello is a very simple way for me to represent this way of working, but professional companies and professional teams usually use something like Jira or bigger tools like that, because Trello is, although it's very useful for smaller scale, it's not really designed to do really serious agile development. It's not really the intention, but it is possible to make a simple version, and for our intents and purposes that's good enough. So this is the place where all your stakeholders were going to fill up basically everything. They're going to add every feature that they want into this board. Now, that's the first step in this process. The second step is going to be that the team sits down with the stakeholders, either a project manager or a team lead or something like that, and they're going to pick the cards that are the most prioritized for the company at that given moment. In other words, the stakeholders need to express that, hey, this is more important to start work on than this, and then we prioritize this backlog accordingly. Now, this may change many times, but that's the basic idea, anywho. So what then happens is that we are going to estimate the work, and when we feel good and ready to actually do that, we are going to move things into the ready column. In other words, this has been we have discussed as a team, and basically all the developers have been able to ask their questions and gotten a good understanding of roughly how much work is entailed, and we have given an estimation, and an estimation is simply us stating that, oh, this is going to take a certain amount of time. Once all that is done, and we're going to walk through that in the next video, we're going to move this card over to ready, and then well, not this specific card, because an epic is very rarely that you work on an epic. We're probably going to break this into smaller stories, and we're going to walk through that as well, don't worry. But anywho, when we have a bunch of stories that we have that feels ready to be worked on, we're simply going to move them over into the ready column, and this is where some people use sprints, some people don't, but the idea is basically that you plan and allocate a workload that feels achievable in a specific amount of time. It can be a week, it can be 2 weeks, it can be 3 months, it doesn't really matter, but you have a unit of time under which you're going to work on a specific set of features, and that's what you allocate for, you plan for and you allocate, and then you put them in ready. And then when that is done, well, it's up to us developers to basically just pick the card that is whichever we want and then put it in ongoing, and we start working, and then we work and we follow certain practices, and I will show you those as well. Once we have decided that, hey, we feel that this is fairly much done now, or this feature is working and I would like to have a code review or something like that, it doesn't have to work this way, but this is very common. You will have some validation process where you submit a merge request or something like that, which is we will touch on what that is as well. But the basic idea is that you submit your code for review by somebody else on your team, so that they can check your code and look, because it's always useful to have another pair of eyes looking at your code, because trust me when I say this, you will make mistakes. You will make many mistakes, and it's much better to have at least two pair of eyes on the same code, because if somebody coming out from the outside has a fresh perspective, which is very useful. So basically what can now happen is that this code review thing here is basically going to be picked up by one of your coworkers. They're going to put this into the next column, basically just illustrating that, hey, this card is representing that I'm now right now in the process of code reviewing this code. And depending on whether or not I'm happy, I can move this card back to ongoing and give some feedback to my coworker. I will show you exactly later on like how this all works. And then it can go back and forth. But the idea is that you slowly progress to the right all the time, and going backwards is like, it's a bad thing. If you can avoid it, that's great, but sometimes you need to go back and forth until you can go to the next step, which is ready for testing. So when the code review has passed and we're happy with the way the code looks, we're going to start testing. And testing can be done either by the team themselves, or they may have a QA or a tester of some sort of person who does the manual testing and stuff like this. Ready for testing is basically just to make sure that the feature works. Somebody else should validate that the feature that you have implemented works in the way that it's supposed to be working. Writing unit tests and all of this stuff is not entailed in this. It depends on the work process, but usually you write your tests and stuff of this nature in the ongoing section, but this section here is more for just manual testing and making sure that everything actually works on somebody else's computer than yours. And just as you can see here, we can pick up this card, put it in testing, and then it's our responsibility to test and validate that everything works. And then finally, when we feel that the testing is done, we will put that into some ready to be merged or ready to be released pile here. And depending on our release strategy, some companies release once a week, once a month, once every 6 months, and some companies just release continuously and just do it whenever something is ready. It depends on the company, but there is a release strategy. And when finally everything has been merged into master and it's out there into production, or it's at least in what we call the done state, there's no more work to be done, we move the card over to done, and we go all the way back and we pick up the next thing. And that's the basics of how to work in this Kanban style method. It's as I said earlier, what you should take away from this is that all it really is that there's a card that represents a piece of work, and each column just represents different steps in the release process that you need to pass in order to get to done. Once you're in done, everything is shipped and ready. And now, well, in the next video, we're going to have a look at breaking things into stories.